It's time to turn down the noise and tune in to News You Can Use, the show that gives you a quick insight into the latest twists and turns in healthcare news, where every diagnosis comes with an order of side-splitting humor. Your hosts are Dr. Nick, a longtime host, innovator, and healthcare wizard who can prescribe a digital dose of innovation to cure even the most ailing operational inefficiencies. And Dr. Craig Joseph, the healthcare guru who can diagnose both patient and software glitches with equal precision, making sure hospitals run smoother than a well-oiled robot doc. So buckle up, because we're diving into the ER of excitement, the ICU of irrationality, and the waiting room of wacky wisdom. Now here's Dr. Nick and Dr. Craig.
Welcome to the month of September. I'm Dr. Nick.
And I'm Dr. Craig.
This week, we'll be dissecting the latest healthcare news, unraveling the twists and turns, and making sense of maybe some of the debacles in healthcare.
Just remember, life's a lot like a breaking news story. Unpredictable, often absurd, and occasionally leaves you wondering if it's all just a cosmic prank.
This week, we take a look at Eli Lilly and their new mafia look, and the cheerful Commonwealth Fund report.
And we dive into cybersecurity and fun with code names and claims denial's disproportionate impact.
But first off this week, we're going to look at the mysterious Big Pharma bus. What is the Big Pharma bus, you ask, Craig?
I was wondering, and where do I buy tickets? How does this work?
Yeah, we're not sure where it's going to, but we are wondering where it came from. So this particular piece of news came out of Stat, which essentially had a piece talking about this big pharma bus that seems to be touring around, essentially opposing, I think, the big pharma world. And they asked the question, who's behind this? What's the story and where's this coming from? Because there's no details about it. It says bust big pharma, pharma reform, or America's for pharma reform. There appears to be a whole website that is associated with this particular group called bustbigpharma.com. And I was certainly curious. I wondered if Stat had done any investigation and thought, well, let's go see if we could find who was behind it. So I looked up the registrar, only recently been registered for that particular domain. The administrative contact was listed as an individual by the name of Aaron Sagers, who's listed in Brooklyn, New York. Unfortunately, that name not sufficiently unique to find an individual. It did come with a contact number, and I thought I was onto something as I went searching and trying to zero in. And I think that's where that name Aaron Sagers came from, was from that particular contact number, because GoDaddy had screened out all of the contact details, which you can pay to have done. And ultimately, I think this number used to belong to Aaron, but was transferred and is now owned by GoDaddy, and some of the reverse lookups hadn't actually caught up. So that proved to be a dead end. Do you have any ideas, Craig?
Well, my first idea is we should have you say the words GoDaddy as much as possible on this show, because I think our ratings are going to go way up with you speaking like that. I had not heard about this. I hadn't read the article in Stat, and I had not gone to that website. It's interesting. There's always there's the push and pull of folks with regard to pharma in the U.S., which I completely understand. Americans pay a lot more than other citizens of other industrialized countries. Certainly we pay a lot more. The argument from the industry side is, well, you get a lot more too. And all of this research, pharmaceutical companies spend lots and lots of money on research that mostly doesn't work out. And only a small percentage of our research works out. So we need to make up that loss, which is a reasonable statement. So I think I see both sides. I don't I don't know where this came from, and I'm not sure how effective putting a bus on the road with big signs is. Although I suspect it's focused in Washington D.C. Because that's where the people who make the laws are. Yeah, I'm not sure if they're getting their money's worth, but we're talking about it, so I guess so.
Well, I mean, at a minimum, I'd want to know who was on the bus, and maybe who's driving it, because that might actually give. The whole concept of trying to hide your identity. I know you've got to be really good at this stuff, because ultimately, there's always a connection to be found. Although I'm not sufficiently skilled enough in the deep dive, and maybe not enough time to sort of go after this. But I am curious. I think it's interesting. It was concurrent with the Senate hearings on, some of the GLP-1 agonists that just talked about those very issues. So I think what I saw in the reports was, the high prices that we pay in the US for the same drug, Ozempic, in this particular instance, and this was, addressed to the CEO of that company. Almost $1,000 in the US, but in Canada it's 155, 122 in Denmark, and $59 in Germany. I come on, I'm with you. I think there's some balance in here, but everything that I read about that says that we've been paying over the top for as long as this industry has existed, perhaps, and all because why? Because the money's here or something. I'm not really sure, but
go where the money is. And another thing that's it's complicated, right? We haven't talked about PBMs, and so there's lots of fingers that can be pointed. The manufacturer says, well, that's not what we're charging for, and the fact that you're paying $1,000 a month, well, that's been marked up by the middleman.
That was exactly what the CEO said to the Senate. He was, it's not my fault. Blame the pharmacies.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, but the problem is all of these industry groups have valid points, right? That's the problem, Dr. Nick, in my opinion. You can't discount any of them as being ridiculous because
Can I just say, I'm going to turn that around and say they all have valid points. Is also they all have their fingers in the pie.
They're all trying to maximize shareholder value.
Right.
That's
which is, appropriate for a public company, right?
It's absolutely true. Yeah. If there were an easy solution, I think I would have already been
you'd be saving
president.
money on your drugs?
No, I'd be made president and I'd be enacting these solutions.
Oh, God forbid.
No, you don't want
Joseph,
that.
No,
that would be bad. It would be bad. I'm putting that out there.
Connected to this was the Eli Lilly news that I'm sorry, just left me shaking my head. Here they are strong-arming their patients into revealing the source of their compounded GLP-1. So maybe for the benefit of those that don't understand, if you can't get the drug in the form, and this applies to pediatrics a lot. I think you'd know this, right? So if you can't get the drug and it's not formulated officially, it can be compounded, and is appropriately so, especially in neonates and some of the smaller ones, because you've got to get that appropriate dosage, and it's much, much smaller. And I think that's the go-around that folks have been using for these GLP-1 drugs, and compound pharmacies have been springing up all over the place. And now they want to go after it, and they sent out notices to all the patients saying, "Tell us who sent this to you," right?
Yeah, it's confusing to me. So compounding pharmacies have always been around. They're relatively speaking kind of like mom and pop shops, as I like to think of them. They're small. I wouldn't call them factories. They can just be in the back of a regular pharmacy where they can concoct and make formulations of drugs that are not commercially available. And the problem that we're having now for some of these GLP-1s is that there's not enough of them. They can't make them fast enough,
right? Which
makes it now allowable in the US for others to take these copyrighted, trademarked, what's the right word? I don't know. probably neither one of those. But normally you can't just copy someone else's medication and start making it, but you can if there's not enough of it. And this is odd. So this was one of the pharmaceutical companies somehow got a list of patients who had gotten copies of the medications from compounding pharmacies and said, hey, we'd like to have access to your medical records so that we can compare the quality, the outcomes that you've had essentially to the outcomes of patients who've had the real medicine, which is the best
real medicine.
Oh, the best medicine, the real medicine, AKA the medicine that we formulated. It's an interesting, from a research standpoint, I think that would be interesting. Lilly makes an argument that, hey, these compounding pharmacies are not under the same strict supervision that we are. That's accurate. And may not have it may not have the highest level of quality control like we do. That's also accurate. But it does seem it's an odd thing to do. I'll grant you that, and I'm not sure how many people are going to respond well to such a. I'm looking at the email now. At the letter. It's a snail mail letter on a piece of paper. I would not respond well to that, and would probably not grant access to my medical records to a pharmaceutical company that actually I'm not even dealing with, right? Because I didn't get my meds from them.
It doesn't exactly paint you in a good corner, given the low level of trust I think that we see in the marketplace, right? It's a shaking my head kind of challenge. I think maybe somebody needs to rethink that.
They're not stepping back.
Really?
According to this article, this says the CEO of Lilly is not backing away from the fight. I get it. They're going to be advertising the fact that, hey, you want the real stuff because we have better quality, which may or may not be the case. It's really unknowable at this point. But you can't, if you're not making it fast enough and people want it, then that's what happens. When you start to make it, when they can up their production and there's a supply is ample, then all of a sudden this all stops. It's not a problem anymore. Right? Because then compounding pharmacies are not allowed to do what they're doing.
Right.
So, it's a wonder.
Maybe they'll be like the Sonos CEO who is sitting on some pretty challenging customer experience and has actually had to pull back on the, hey, we're releasing a whole new version of our software that has just really upset users. I'll be clear, me included, but I'm still, and sadly for them, I'm reminded about it every morning because the alarm that I set the night before the upgrade occurred still shows up on my iPhone and I can't get rid of it. So,
yikes.
Yeah. All right. So moving on, we're still with the legal world and some of the challenges. Epic, largest, certainly one of the largest, I think, EHRs is being sued by Particle Health. And there's certainly been lots of commentary. What are your thoughts?
Well, full disclosure, I used to work for Epic. So put that out there. Epic has been sued by many groups before, mostly I think patent trolls, and they have a very aggressive response.
They do,
and they are Epic is one of the largest electronic health record vendors. Definitely in the United States, probably in the world, one of the top. And they don't back down from legal fights because it costs money or time.
Right.
And so I'm not confident that Particle Health and their law firm fully appreciate the history. Epic was founded in 1979. It doesn't matter if it's cheaper to settle; they will never settle, or at least have never in the past settled if they think that they're in the right. So, what are they being sued for? They're essentially being sued for Particle Health is asserting that that Epic is trying to shut them out of the payer space. So by payers, we mean the insurance companies here in the
Right.
United States.
Yep.
And Epic has produced some software that makes it easier for payers to get access to the medical records of their clients, insureds. I'm not sure what the right term is, which they have the right to do, but typically it's very difficult. So when you have insurance, you've given the right to your insurance company to be able to do what they to get access to your medical records, to check for quality, to make sure that the physicians and hospitals who are billing them are actually doing what they say they're doing, and that sort of thing, making sure the documentation is accurate and represents what really happened. And so to make that easier, people want that, and people are paying Epic for that, or at least insurance companies are. And Particle Health is potentially a competitor in that space. That's what they see themselves as, and think that Epic is stifling them to try to decrease competition. I think that's a 30,000-foot summary of their argument. Again, complicated. I don't think it's obvious on one side or the other.
Right.
But I do think that whenever third parties like law firms expect a business to react in the way a business typically would react,
Yeah, right.
they're gonna hit a freight train in Epic.
Yes. I think that's exactly right. And what's the piece that I found interesting in all of this was the selection of the law firm who had been described as the top for the last 3 years, top. And I forgive me if I get precisely, but essentially, highly regarded, highly successful, however you sort of determine and present that. And I think what I'm curious about is what the deal is. Are they paying for this, or is it on some kind of retainer basis where, hey, if we win, we'll which all presents some. Anyway, it's certainly going to be a story worth watching, right?
Much like the first story we talked about with the bus, big pharma bus tour. You're the most interesting aspect of it is, wait, who's bankrolling this?
Yeah,
I think this might ultimately be the most interesting aspect of this. Particle
Right.
Health is a small company;
Yep.
they can't afford this for sure.
Right.
I think the chance of success is low enough that I'm not sure the law firm would want to take that risk.
Right.
Of, hey, if we lose, and this is going to be years and years and years, if we lose, we get nothing, and we've lost millions and tens of millions of dollars. So that's a great question, Dr. Nick. Who is bankrolling this lawsuit? That will be an interesting question to answer.
Well, and another one that we'll watch carefully. So moving on, social determinants of health and insurance claim denials. I'm just going to say, not shockingly, but nice article in JAMA that came out that reviewed denials for preventative care on 1.5 million patients who are covered by their employers or the marketplace. And the denial rate, as they described it, was brutally disparate for the lower income patients. They were 43% more likely to get a denial than the higher income patients, who I suspect, maybe tell me if I'm wrong here, probably need that preventative care less, or at least the coverage for it. Not that they don't need the preventative care, but could potentially cover it if it's not. And even a change by race. And I'm just going to say, given all the stuff that we've seen over the course of many years going back now, it's almost duh, I'm afraid. Yes.
Yeah, I'm looking at the article in JAMA now, and what we're talking about are things like colorectal screening, cholesterol screening, mammograms.
And by the way, we're coming to this, but the Commonwealth Fund, that's the only thing in Cheerful Commonwealth Fund report where the US is actually good.
Yeah, and paying for some of these things, diabetes screenings,
right,
those kinds of things. And it is curious why these would be denied more frequently. You would expect the denial rates to be the same no matter how much money you made.
It should be, right?
Right. Or what your race was, or how much education you have.
And it raises a question in my mind. I got to be honest. how, I mean, assuming that that's part of the equation, is that contributing? God, let's hope not. But if it's
No.
not, how is that actually translating into the reality that we're seeing here? What is, I mean, I'm, scientifically fascinated as well as appalled in this, because I'd love to understand why that's the case and where is the bleed out that's allowing this to take place. Because somewhere it's happening, and it may not even be deliberate. It may just be a sort of, this, what do we call it? The inbuilt or inherent bias that's sort of in the data. Is that what it's fascinating and appalling.
I mean, if you look through the article, they have some suggestions as to, or they're not suggestions, but possibilities. I can't imagine any payer checking this out, wanting this to happen. Right.
Right. No, exactly.
So I think
it saves money downstream, right?
Well, no, but I'm saying like no payers like, listen, if they only have a high school education, we're going to deny them. Let's make sure to ask that question. That's like almost unthinkable.
Yes, quite.
So I'm quoting here: patients may sort into insurance plans with fewer administrative resources or higher propensity for billing errors. Patients may visit different healthcare organizations with different billing practices. So, if you live in a poorer part of town, you're going to a healthcare system or a hospital with fewer resources, so they don't know how to follow the rules. So they get dinged by the insurance company. That one could imagine that that's an answer to your question.
Yep. All right. So briefly, the Commonwealth Fund report that gets published every year reviews healthcare systems. Once again, the US is depressingly poor performance. And not even, I mean, you can look at the line and everybody's on this sort of line of, various countries, but then radically falls in terms of so many measures. And ironically, the one area where the US actually performed best or better or however was in the screening programs that we have that actually do a pretty good job. But as I said, cheerful Commonwealth Fund report. My, oh my.
Yeah, I like some of their key findings. The top three countries are Australia, the Netherlands, and the United Kingdom. I've never heard of that last one. I've never heard of that last one.
Yeah, I'm going to say that the folks in the NHS, whilst they're passionately supporters of the UK healthcare system, it's been struggling significantly. So it's not brilliant everywhere, just to be clear, but it is pretty good. And, I just saw something just recently locally where, somebody lost, it was a physician, lost employment as a result of cancer and cancer treatment. And then because they lost their employment, they lost access to the healthcare insurance that they were paying through their job, even with, and it all sort of, it rolls down the hill. It's terrible.
Yep.
All right. Last topic. And, for me, this was just a bit of fun, but no surprise here. Healthcare is targeted, again, as usual, for ransomware. But in the report from, it was Bleeping Computer, it was all the names. And all I could think of was World War II and, some of the movies and, books that I've read on that whole space. It was these code names that they all had. So, the group names of these ransomware: Vanilla Tempest, Vice Society, Hello Kitty, Five Hands. Where the hell are they coming up with these things? Are they going to the double cross system where I gotta say, I actually want my code name. I feel like I need to get a code name that's beyond my sort of usual, Dragon Man, or maybe I should be Cobweb. These are all real names from World War II of the double agents and stuff. Carrot. Celery was another. Who the hell was Celery? What were they doing? Why were they called Celery?
Your code name is GoDaddy.
GoDaddy. Okay.
That's your code name.
I'm going to come up with one for you. I'm just saying
that's fair. I'm waiting. Yep. I'm ready.
I'm going to say we're going to call you. We're Mullet. Yes, perfect. Mullet.
Oh,
there it is.
Hurts. That hurts.
We actually know who Mullet was in the code name. He was a Briton born in Belgium, apparently. Or you could be Teapot. That would be all right. He was
Actually, I like that
German.
more. I like that more. Not the German part necessarily. I'm not pro or anti.
Oh, here it is. Weasel. There it is. Weasel.
No,
Or the worm.
come on.
All right.
Oh, Dr. Nick, I was trying to give you a good one, and now you're just hurting me. And I feel like our listeners are going to turn against you. They're going to turn against you now because I'm a sympathetic figure, and you're attacking me here.
Yes, you keep telling yourself that. We find ourselves at the end of another episode, exploring healthcare's mysteries before they become your emergencies. Until next time, I'm Dr. Nick.
And I'm Dr. Craig.